From this slide, you can learn what is biostatistics and some terminologies. Biostatistics is an application of statistics to the data from biological, biomedical, health, and medical field. It includes that how you do the data collections, organize the data, analyze the data, interpret the data, and then summarize the data. It comprises a set of principles and methods for generating and using quantitative evidence to address scientific questions, for estimating unknown quantities, and for quantifying the uncertainty in our estimates. In general, biostatistics is helping you to search for the truth. For example, if you want to know the stress level among university students, so biostatistics is start. You need to collect the data from the sample in the populations, organize the data, analyze the data, and interpret it, and finally summarize the data. Before you start to do biostatistics, you need to know some terminologies. Data. What is data? Data usually collected from the sample, which represent the populations. Raw data mean that primary data have not been organized. You can get the data from medical record, registry, experiment, and research. Remember, always keep a copy of raw data. Populations. Populations, in other words, is reference populations or target. It means that all individuals of the interest that we want to study. Sample means that the individuals represent the populations. Random sample or probability sample means that the individual is selected independently with the known and zero probability of being selected. Simple random sample. The individuals is selected independently with the same probability of being selected. For example, a study would like to investigate the prevalence of obesity among university students. So, this study only selected students from 4 faculties named as A, B, C, D. So, based on this study, populations mean university students. Samples mean students from 4 selected faculties. Parameter mean that the characteristic values to the populations. For example, population mean, population's median. Statistic mean that the characteristic value to the sample. For example, sample mean like mean value of the blood pressure among the samples being selected. Statistics often be presented. Why? Because usually researchers conduct a study among the samples being selected. Sampling. Sampling is mean that process of selections of subset of from a populations. For example, sample from populations. Sampling error. Sampling error mean that the differences or amount of error that exists between a sample statistic and populations parameter is caused by collecting data from subset of the whole populations. For example, this study would like to investigate the prevalence of smoking among populations. These populations have 200 respondents. Out of 200 respondents, 120 respondents are non-smoker, 80 respondents are smoker. So if let's say we calculate the prevalence of the smoking among this population, we call that parameter. So it will be 40% of the respondents are smoker. When we sampling the sample from the population to a study, for example, 60 respondents that we randomly selected from the populations, out of these 60 respondents, only 20 are smokers. So based on the samples that we calculated, the prevalence for smoker are 33%. You can see that the prevalence of smoker among the populations is not same as the prevalence of smoker among the sample. So this called sampling error. Type of statistic. There are two types of statistic. One is descriptive statistic, one is inferential statistic. Now we go to explain what is the descriptive statistic. Descriptive statistic is organizing and describing data that collected using statistic values, table, and graph. Statistic values that you can use, for example, mean, median, mode. Example of this study, 200 respondents was recruited. Descriptive statistics mentions that 20% were female. Mean of BMI was 25.0. You can use table to represent your data or the graph. Inferential statistics is making inferences about populations based on the data that collected from the sample. Help you to generalize the results from a sample to the populations. For example, recruit 200 students from whole university to investigate the academic performance. So based on the 200 data, we make inferences of what a population is. In a research, we usually collect the samples from the populations via sampling method. And then we do the analysis on the sample data, like descriptive analysis and inferential analysis, and generalize back the results to the population. Variable. Variable means that characteristic being studied, collected, or measured. For example, academic performance, gender, BMI, household income. There are two types of the variables. One is independent variable, one is dependent variable. Independent variables mean that the variable that researcher control or manipulate. Dependent variable mean that a variable being studied or measured and is depending on the independent variable. For example, academic performance depends on the times you spend on studying. So academic performance is independent variable. Times you spend on studying is independent variable. Another example is we are looking for the independent variables that affect the weight. So weight is dependent variable. Frequency of exercise, frequency of having fast foods, frequency of sugar intake, etc. are independent variable. Types of variable and scale of measurements. There are another types of variable can divide up to quantitative variable and qualitative variable. Scale of measurements for quantitative variables have interval scale and ratio scale. For qualitative variables, the scale of measurements have nominal scale and ordinal scale. Quantitative variable mean that the variable can be measured numerically. For example, height in cm, weight in kg, temperature in degree. It can divide up to countable and uncountable variable. Countable variable mean that discrete variable, no intermediate values between consecutive values. For example, number of persons, number of cars. Uncountable quantitative variable mean that continuous variable, any numerical values between consecutive values. For example, height, time taken, etc. Qualitative variable mean that cannot be measured numerically. It can be divided into different numeric categories. For example, gender, blood type, level of education, hair color. Let's look at interval scale. Interval scale mean that the equal interval between two measurements. For example, temperature. The differences between 10 degree and 20 degree is same as the difference between 80 degree and 90 degree. Can measure the differences between two values. Remember, 0 doesn't mean that no temperature. So it indicates that no absolute 0 point. For ratio scale, it's same like interval scale, equal interval between two measurements. But for ratio scale, have absolute 0 point, mean 0, nothing. For example, weight. 0 weight mean no weight. Nominal scale means that data can be categorized by name with the not specific order. For example, gender, blood type, ethnic group. Ordinal scale means that the data can be ranked from more to less, higher to lower. For example, income group, low income group, medium income group, high income group. Cancer stage, stage 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't know exact distance between two categories, cannot measure the differences. Parametric test means that the statistical test that depends on and assumptions about the distribution of the data. For example, normal distribution, t-distribution, chi-square distribution. We can see the test example is t-test, chi-square test, ANOVA test, and etc. Non-parametric test is a statistical test that do not require the assumptions about the distribution of the data. For example, Cushing-Wallace test, Wilkinson-Science rank test. Types of analysis can be divided by 3: univariable analysis, bivariate analysis, multivariable analysis. Univariable analysis means that analyze one variable. Bivariate analysis means that analyze the relationship between two variables. Multivariable analysis means that analyze more than two variables. The end for this topic. Please check what you learned today. Thank you. Hope you enjoy this.